Welcome back. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. We are on the last part, which is historically the first part. We're talking about the meta, the new meta.
Yeah, this is going to be more like a normal Lightforge tacked on to the end of this thing. And it's. We talked a lot about the tier list. We are now in our 8th hour of streaming, so it's a little tired into here, but we do want to wrap it up, and we normally don't get a chance to, so we felt like we'd do this at the end here. We want to talk about what's happening when we're going into the meta, right? Like strictly from a practical perspective, going on the ground. Like, what do all these cards mean that are high value and low value? So let's start first at the most obvious thing for saviors, which is that there are a lot of 200 plus value cards. Like, there are a lot of really insanely overpowered cards. And a lot of these are cards I bet Blizzard knows are overpowered. They're not thinking about it from an arena perspective, but it's what's going to happen. So how do metas react when cards are overpowered?
You make sure that you don't play the game long enough for them to matter. Honestly, that is a legit strategy, and that is one that I will be taking quite often.
Okay. So there's the neutral wrapped golem that is 7 mana, has taunts attached to it. It's a 7/5, summon 1/1s with taunts at the end, has reborn. Big issue. You can get around that. What other overpowered cards? Because a lot of the overpowered cards that we're looking at here aren't actually like late game cards, right? We're looking at Warrior last. We have Frightened Flunky at 161. I guess you can't really react to that. Restless Mummy at 165. Livewire Lance is 205, and that's 3 mana. Like, you can't really get under a Warrior. Warlocks have Disease Vulture. I guess you could sort of get under that in that its power level doesn't come until later. But they do have Plague of Flames, although if you're aggro, it does clear your board, but it uses up a lot of Warlock resources too, so you might still get there. Um, like, I don't know. With the Wrapped Golem, you can get under. But I think a lot of these other really high powered cards that we're seeing in this meta, they're not stuff that you can like get under as effectively.
Yeah. So this is part of the reason why when you look at the tier list, you might think that, so what are my options here, right? Like you could either play the extraordinarily long game or you can just try to kill them, not in the extreme aggro hunter way, but that extra reach, because there will be times in the mid game before they can really stabilize that if you push a little bit more, you can get there. If you kind of take the necessary risks. And this is why, if you look at the tier list here, right, like the new tier list and kind of the old tier list as well, you'll see that even though we have everything truncated, everything really squeezed because of these new OP cards. Um, Reach is more important
Mm-hmm.
than ever, even bad reach. Because right now on the tier list, uh, Boulder Fist Ogre has the same score as Reckless Rocketeer. And to some people, and to me initially, even with my aggro tendencies, I was like, whoa, that's real weird. That's kind of where we're at. Like, do you really want Boulder Fist Ogre in this meta? In this meta that we're coming up on, where you just get taunted by everything. Where if they have a Basilisk, you can't play your Ogre. Where your Ogre can't get past the 1/1 taunt that the Wrapped
Where
Golem.
Demon Bolt and Imp whatever thing
Hmm.
now all exist, and Warlock probably going to be the number one played class in the arena.
Yeah. So that's sort of where we're at, where because of the power level of the small drops like Gastropod and Basilisk, because of all the AoEs and because of all the big drops that either do something immediately or put so much pressure on the board, like Raft Golem and Violet Worm, um, these things, these mid range things that don't do anything really, your Boulderfist Ogres, your Spiteful Smiths, right? These things have really fallen. And this is why Yeti, like in many videos before, also has fallen because you have such a huge power level in your 3 drops. And we have some pretty powerful 2s as well. And some really powerful late game stuff. I mean, just looking at the 7 mana and plus cards in neutral, only in neutral, because we've talked so much about the powerful late game cards and classes. We have Amani Warbear, we have the Pit Crocolus, the Violet Worm. You have Sated Threshodon is just a random thing for you to drop that creates some tension as well.
Sated Threshodon's pretty good. It's 109.
It's pretty good.
Like that's like Cursed Disciple levels.
Yeah, because it puts down that pressure as well. You can snowball still with a Stormwind Champion. You can taunt the Mashog Enforcer. So these are all things, you have Wasteland Scorpid as just 7 mana 3/9, but as poisonous, so limitless attack onto the board. You just have all these like powerhouse things at the very end as well. So man, if you are drafting these kind of vanilla mid-game things that don't do anything, you're really behind. You're really, really behind. So you better be dropping something with an extraordinary amount of board presence and pressure and power, or you better have initiative. Otherwise, get out. Like, don't give me these ogres, man. Like, they sit in my hand for forever, and then I drop them and they don't do anything. Nope, not good enough.
Yep. So when really big like swing kind of like cards happen, and when really overpowered cards happen, you want stuff that does stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's what it is at the end of the day. You remember when, like, I'm trying to think of when the last time like dominance was happening. I remember the Defile meta really well, where Defile exists. It's an overpowered card. It was not bucketed particularly correctly because, I don't know, I think people are like me and they don't like doing the math on it. And you just kind of lived with it in some sense, and that was one class. But what's good against Defile besides things that, I don't know, the death rattles weren't good, divine shields weren't good. You had to have like really high health minions, and even then sometimes it just gets you wiped harder, right? Like, what was really good was things that got value before the body, like battle cries and things like that. What was really good was things that drew cards. What was really good was like not caring about it and just hoping they don't have Defile, right? Like playing really into it. So here we're in a situation where I think you'll fall into that same area where the punishes are so hard. And the punishes are also so rare in that a lot of them are not just rare cards, but probably epic cards too, that you're just not going to be able to play around stuff. So if you're aggro, you're going to go aggro. Even if you're control, just like, if they have it, they have it, and you're down a couple cards and you try to make that up. If they don't have it, then they don't have it, and you can actually win the game. So it's rough. Like, as a good player, you don't want to get to the end game and be like, how many Pit Crocolists do you have, and how many Amani Warbears do I have, and when do we draw them? Because that'll win the game. That's not where you want to be. That's not a ton of skill checking involved there. Like, that's really about as much skill checking as, hey, who managed to curve out first in Curvestone and then win the game? Like, it tests for some skills. You gotta make some decisions when you're trying to play like slow and live and do whatever. Just like, you gotta trade on the board correctly if you're trying to Curvestone, but it's not too much. Where the skill concentrates around the mid range in the mid game, and you have a lot more decisions to make. Like, dropping a 8 mana card is not a huge decision if all of your choices are 8 mana cards. It's much more of a decision if you're debating between dropping an 8 mana worm or playing 2 4 mana cards. That's a huge decision. That's going to affect whether you win or lose the game. So when you're talking about trying to force kind of like that into the arena and you don't have good 4 mana cards, it gets a little more difficult. So I don't know how the meta is gonna react to having all of these powerful cards, but I think a lot of it is just going to be like you either structure your deck to ignore them, like you were talking about with aggro, or you just blindly play into them and say you probably don't have them at this time in your hand. That's just what the odds say. Uh, and you know they exist more now, and you're just gonna win or lose based on that.
Yeah, I hate to bring this up because I know it's going to give people some PTSD, but that risk assessment you did with MCT, dust that off.
Oh
That's
god.
kind of how it's going to be with a lot of these
Oh, you know MCT's
new
back in the
overpowered
arena.
cards. Well, kind of, but not. No, you can't draft it, but yeah, it's back. As in, there's more ways for you to get it, which let's not talk about. Um, but that's kind of it. So when we're talking about these epic cards that just win them the game immediately, you're just like you do the same calculation with the MCT. It's like, well, I can't give up uh, playing the fourth minion because on average it is more advantageous. And even if they have MCT, there's only 25% chance they steal the game losing minion. And then of course it happens. And you're like, okay, well, I did the calculation. It was still correct and I live with it. And you're just gonna have to do that here, where you say, okay, well, I can't I really can't get rid of the flak mage. I just don't have the damage. I still need to develop, and if he has that one more secret after playing two more secrets, like two secrets already, I guess he just wins. And then he
Yep.
just plays a third secret and clears your board, and you're like, okay, that was
That's
good.
what happens, right? Because if you
Yep.
keep clearing him, you're probably not going to win. Like you can't give all their cards credit when they don't deserve the credit. What you got to watch out with is that this is the exact opposite type of thinking as Rise of Mechs. Like literally the exact opposite. In Rise of Mechs, you clear all the mechs. Why? Because they can buff a mech. You very rarely like do the other things because that's Curvestone. This is the exact opposite. This is the damn the consequences. And when you're structuring decks, the one thing you could do when you're structuring decks is just be prepared to be off the board. No matter what kind of deck you have, like unless you're doing super, super, super extreme aggro. And I'm talking about like you probably don't even want 4 drops. Also, 4 drops are not good. You probably want like 1 through 3 and then like 1 or 2 5 mana cards if you're going that aggro. But if you're not doing anything that aggro, you need to be able to come back onto the board or deal a bunch of reach at the end after you're off the board. Like if you're aggro, and you need to come back on the board if you're mid range or slow mid range, or definitely if you're control, because you're going to be off the board. You are. The game will always flip. Every single game, you will be off the board at least once, probably twice, and you have to come back onto the board somehow in order to win it. Your opponent's also going to be off the board. This is, you're working with the same card pool here. So when you're drafting, make sure that you have that ability, and make sure that your deck has enough card draw and enough stuff to actually get you there after you come back on the board. Like, don't just run out of steam once you come back on the board. And think about that. Whenever you lose, think about that. Think like, how many times did I get back on the board after I lost it? Or if I never had the board, why was I not able to get back on the board? And if you're not answering that question in a way that's just like, well, I just couldn't, like, these were my cards, it's just not going to happen, well, then you draft it wrong. Because you're going to be off the board. The swings are too high, the OP cards are too high. So, yeah. So, draft cards that do stuff even before they're cleared or before, like, whatever. And then draft things that let you come back onto the board from a position of being down. Like, decks have to start doing that a lot more. You can't do the like if you're thinking like if you liked how druids drafted in the Rise of Mechs meta, this isn't it. Like you can't just do anything that simple anymore unless you're doing it on the control side. You could just stall out forever, right? And then try to win on card advantage. That's the like not like brain dead, but like the very little like decision making in the big picture kind of way to win now. The super push one will work for like Hunter, and like that's it. I think.
Pretty sure. I don't think any other classes got things that really push them forward. Like Paladins always have buffs, and yeah, they have some tools normally that would be good for aggro, but they really needed like the 1 mana divine shield taunt, right?
Yeah.
Something to get them started. They need more of those sort of things to help them snowball, and then they needed, even though they're strong threes, they need stronger threes. Like they needed Coghammer back. They want muster. They want those things. So it's going to be really tough. It's going to be really, really tough because we do have a ton of tools for people to try to slow down the game, to extend it, and to force you into difficult decisions because, yeah, like you will get punished by those removals if you don't remove. But then if you're removing, you're getting your opponents closer to a bigger removal. So
Yep.
you got to make those hard choices. And this is going to be the toughest part about the new meta, where there are metas in which you can afford to take no risks. You can play a very straightforward style. Here, you necessarily have to take risks
Mm-hmm.
because not only is that the optimal way to play, you are forced to take risks
And they're
sometimes.
bigger risks than normal.
They're much bigger. They will feel worse.
Mm-hmm.
They will feel more uncertain for you because it's fuzzier, and it'll feel worse when you guess wrong. Even when you guess right, it'll feel worse when you correctly calculated the odds, but they just suck out, right? They
Yeah.
just top deck the thing or whatever, because it's so effective. It's not just a swing of 2 to 3 mana. They essentially got a swing of 5 mana and took like 3 cards away from you. We're talking about swings that are of that magnitude. So just fortify yourself. Know that, okay, any sort of uncertainty I feel, that's cool. And any sort of thing that happens, did I just make the initial correct uh, assumption there? So get used to a little bit of murkiness. I think generally, just because new cards, and then learn sort of how often you can expect these cards, and HS replay will definitely help out with that. But you also just gain a better feel of, okay, this is what shamans can do mid game generally, late game generally. This is what
Mm-hmm.
priests can do mid game generally, late game generally. And then you'll get a lot better, right? You'll get a lot better, and then you will be able to identify pockets where you can sort of extend and then retract a little. And when I say retract, it's like, okay, let's value trade a little bit now. So even if my opponent clears, he hasn't gotten the value, and then push hard once again, and then retract a little bit, and then suddenly I'm like pretty close to lethal, and I just win the game off of that. And
Yep.
you'll get really into this tempo, but it's very different from just go 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 go, which you can just do that in Rise of Mechs a lot of times, and then whoever ends up after that like extreme clash, um, and they still have the board, well, I guess they win. So it's quite different. I wouldn't say it's necessarily new because pre-rotation, when we had all the Ungoro cards, we had all the KNC cards and everything, meta was kind of like what I was describing.
Mm-hmm.
Very back and forth, very board tensiony. This was when I was playing my sort of disgusting soul crushing priest, where I would like on turn
uh,
6 be like, okay, we're going for attrition here, and it went to fatigue.
this is when you
um
couldn't finish 2 runs in a stream.
I couldn't. I really couldn't.
Never
That soul
could.
crushing priest
Mm-hmm.
took forever. But yeah, this is where you really have to identify this amorphous weird thing that is board tension, that is mana expectation, and all this risk assessment. It's something that is pretty cool because it's very, very skill testing, but very, very infuriating for a lot of people.
Yep.
What it's going to be.
Okay. I'm gonna try to drill down into the mana slots because while there is a lot of swings, and this is not going to go as straightforward as like a mana analysis in Rise of Mechs, there's still value in it because I would say like almost half your games will still go this way. Huge value on 2 and 3. If you go to Lightforge tier list, you can just uncheck Epic and Legendary, and you get a pretty good sense of the meta. We were talking about the whole F4, right? The hollow meta. F4 is Bone Wraith is 113. That's your highest card. Defender of Argus is 112. Shroom Brewer is 112. Dark Iron Dwarf 111. Fire Plume 111. That's your top end. That's a pathetic top end. There's a lot of cards there. Like when you go down to 100, it's pretty much the same as like 2 drops and 3 drops in terms of the numbers that you get. But the top, it just tops out at 113. Whereas on 3 drops, Basilisk is 131. On 2 drops, Nephroset Ritualist is 130. Quicksand Elemental is 128. Gastropod's 116. Like, they're very high. So what do you do with that? What do you do with that information, right? You have the expectation. Those are safe turns. If you have the board, they're not going to do something to you without using their class spells. They can't. Nothing exists. So, after turn 3, you have a safe turn minus the class spells, which you will learn if you haven't already, that you should watch out for and expect to be board flipping. If they don't do that, so like for example, Paladin's the most predictable one, right? Like, you don't let the Paladins do their 4 stuff, and then you're good. Like, you can now apply that to like every class and just know which classes they are. So I'm talking about like, don't play around like the big board clears or whatever, but you can play around their 4 mana card. Like, it gets real specific. Because they're not going to do too much to you with the Dark Iron Dwarf or a Fire Plume Phoenix compared to every other turn, right? Like, the swing on turn 4 is the smallest swing possible. That's your safety. Conversely, there's not much you can do on turn 5 except for the 2 biggest game swings in like before turn 8. And that is Fungomancer and Dragon Maul Scorcher. So, Fungomancer, if they have 2 things on the board, that's terrible. Like, it's a common card. These cards are going to be seen a lot. Fungomancer's also been underbucketed for a while. I think it's still kind of underbucketed because we have it at a 128. It is in... Which bucket is Fungomancer in? Okay, it's not that underbucketed. It's in the top of the 3rd bucket. But it's a good card. It's gonna get picked a lot. Dragon Maul Scorcher is not as ideal for this meta because this meta does not have like a ton of 1 health minions actually outside of Paladin. But still very good, and if you are keeping a lot of things at 1 health, that's gonna wreck you. But outside of those 2, the power level is really even worse than 4 drops. So you have really another safe turn outside of the 2 extreme examples. So, like, the best way I could describe it is lock down turn 4 because you know what's happening, and then on turn 5, don't fall to the extremities. Like, don't get fungled, or make sure your opponent can't fungle, and make sure they can't get great value on Dragon Maul Scorcher. After that, doesn't matter what they do, they're not going to swing hard, right? It's the class stuff again. So you have 2 relatively safe turns. Turn 6 has always been safe. There's never anything crazy on turn 6. And things get a little crazier starting on turn 7. Right? That's where your like Amani Warbears come in. That's Rap Golem is on turn 7. Stormwind Champ. Like, stuff is going to happen on turn 7. But you have that mid zone. That mid zone is the skill testing area in the mana curve. You're going to come back on the board. You're going to lose the board. That's all like skill testing as well, and especially for the draft. And you're going to need to be able to do that. But for these parts, once you get like the feel of the game, this is where you're going to be able to extract a lot of value. Like, between the start of turn 6 and the start of turn 7, you should be up at least 1, if not 2 cards on your opponent for just knowing this meta way better than your opponent. And if you can do that, that's where the mid-range works, right? Like, that's the consistency that you can take in this meta of otherwise ridiculous swings. You're still going to get off the board. You're still going to need to come on the board. But all that's going to be so much easier if you're at a 2-card advantage, right? Or if you're at what's the equivalent of a 2-card advantage, like an extra 4/4 on the board, right? Like, all that is going to matter a lot in preventing those swings and helping you get back on the board. So it's not always just like, oh, they're on the board now. Now I have to like Lightning Storm the more I lose. You're going to lose a lot if that happens because how many Lightning Storms are you going to get? But you get back on the board by playing this mid-range game like better than your opponent. And you can do that in this meta. This meta is actually very predictable in that middle area. Even as it becomes a lot less predictable in 2 and 3 and in 7 plus.
Yeah, I think this is something that's really important because people, I think, tend to think that power and predictability move on a fulcrum, right? Where essentially, if you increase power, it's like, oh, everything can happen. It's not. Sometimes it does, like with a puzzle box of
Oh
Yaxaran.
god.
Uh, however, what I was gonna say, that's not always the case, and even with puzzle box of Yaxaran, we established it's actually pretty consistent, which is why it's so high. Um, there is a good amount of predictability actually. So if you want to think of something that is unpredictable, well, like Rise of Mechs actually had a decent amount of unpredictability because of the mechs, right?
Yep.
Um, Curve and sort of a consistent power level doesn't exactly mean predictability. And in this case as well, even though there are a lot of things that are really powerful, you have to take the occurrence of them and also just really what you're looking at. Like Funkelmancer is powerful, but it's pretty predictable, right? And if you were
Mm.
losing, if you couldn't really get rid of it before, sure they win more off of it, but like in terms of predictability, in terms of what you should expect for that mana, it's kind of there. It's really sort of right there. So that's where you use it to your advantage. If we are truly in a meta that is powerful and completely unpredictable, well, I guess you do the best you can. But that really isn't the case. Like ADWCTA is basically telling you, it's like don't freak out about the power level and think, well, I guess there's nothing I can do. No, like we've gone through. It's like if you guys have played the arena since the beginning, if you've been through all the metas, it's different because the cards are different, but the idea is we've been through powerful metas before, and you guys have survived and you guys have thrived. You can do it again because it is going to be predictable
Yep.
and exploit that. Because at the end of the day, you knowing what's going to come, you knowing how much initiative is out there and everything, and you being able to take that in, internalize it, and sometimes saying, okay, well, I guess I can't win now. I have to be more patient. That's fine. I can play out 5 more turns and then, try to win there. That's super valuable for you. That's me on turn 6 telling myself, well, I guess I'm playing towards fatigue now and doing it. And you have to
Mm-hmm.
do it. And this is the kind of stuff that you have to do. You have to be a lot more patient. You have to really dig in and let your reads, let the predictability be your friend here. So that's kind of how you have to do things. It's frustrating in a way, but it's also very very, I don't know, soothing in another way. I like it. Like there's without predictability, there's no way that I could have played the soul crushing priest and be like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
like I can already tell we're going to fatigue.
Yep.
That's sort of it. And we're going to be semi back in that zone. With Rise of Mechs, I didn't know, right? Like suddenly they play Snip Snap, like a mech warper and a Snip Snap. I'm like, all right, well, that was fun.
It doesn't even have
Um,
to be that. Like just the existence of like what's the 5/5 war
oh yeah,
machine like or whatever. Like it ruins everything when it comes to predictability.
yep,
Here you have what like you could deal 2 more damage. Like you're back to the old predictability, right? The old predictability is you can always deal 2 more damage than what you have on board, and that's it. Everything else is super extra. Like we're back there outside of specific superpowered cards. So it's gonna be interesting. I think the whole thing is gonna feel like not just more back and forth, but also I don't know. I call constructed-y. It's not really constructed. It's just the feeling of like you can do like double what you used to be able to do on a turn. Um, like that kind of like constructed level swings. Let's just say. Um, but yeah, there's a core to it. Just know that the predictability does not extend on turn 2 and 3, and not after turn 7. Like what's annoying is after turn 7, there's no predictability left. It just swings all over the place. So set yourself up. 4, 5, 6. Figure out your win conditions. Figure out what you want to do. Be able to adapt and everything, but like get your advantage there. because you're not getting it on 2 and 3. That's just who has best cards and who top decked whatever. And it's not going to get it a 7 plus because you don't know what the hell's going to happen anymore. Things are too powerful. Things are too big. Yeah. Last topic before we end this: start on 2 or start on 3. Now that you have the option, what do you do?
Look, it's going to depend on classes and sort of your win condition. But if you had a choice, I would definitely start on 3. The power level of the cards on 3, whether you're talking about, Tar Creeper, Basilisk, the numerous amounts of 3/4s that you're going to be able to get, it's just so much better. It's so much better than the 2 drops, barring Stubborn Gastropod, which has always just been not really. I mean, it's just way too good as a 2. Um, and you can load up on 3. So what you do, here's what happens when you say, I'm going to start on 2. This means you need a 2 and a 3. Because if you played a 2 and you miss a 3, that's so much worse than you just loading up on 3s, right? So what happens when you start on 2? You start on 2, you have to get the 3s, which means you need consistency on 2s and 3s. You have to hit both, like both of the time. Otherwise, you always lose to the guy who just starts on 3. And then your deck just becomes a lot smaller. So yeah, you get that consistency, but you better hit both, and then you better hope that the 2 drop actually does something more than just half of like a 1 mana difference, right? Which is going to happen a lot of the time. So I would recommend, you can feel safe drafting some 2s that do things in the late game, like Never Set Ritualist, right? Sure, take that. It's also just a giant heal later on. That's cool. But because of the way that starting on 2 sort of forces you to hit 2 and 3, which means you have to consistently draft those things, I would say you're fine starting on 3.
Yep. I'd go further and say, like, I wouldn't even worry about the curve anymore. The only part of the curve that I am going to worry about is 4s, because if you don't look at it, you're going to miss it completely, and then you're not going to be able to like get there unless you have like extra 3s or something. Like, I think the curve is super flexible now, where you can just do 2s instead of 3s and 3s instead of 4s, 4s instead of 2s. Like, all sorts of weird craziness is totally available to you now. Don't start and get 6 2-drops and then expect to win the game without being super aggro with 1-drops to support it as well, or without the ability to get your card advantage back through like card draw or something else that you're in control with. Because decks are going to go bigger overall, and you're not going to compete, and you need reach. That there's no reach cards in this new set, like for neutrals. Like, there's not good ones that are arena worthy anyway, and there's plenty of taunts. It's just it's not a good setup. So I'm not saying 2s are bad, but if you have 2s, you need ways to capitalize off them to justify them, and then you need ways to get your card advantage back later on. Otherwise, I agree with Merps. Start on 3. It's much easier. Get your incidental 2s, and you will. You'll just like naturally end up with a bunch of 2s. There are a lot of 2s in this meta. They will just be offered to you. At a certain point, you'll look at it, and you'll be like, I have 2 crappy options and a 2-drop. Fine, I'll take the 2-drop, right? You also have these really good 2-drops like Temple Berserkers, Never Set Ritualist, Quicksand Elementals, Bug Collector. It's not Hogsteed, but they're going to be ones that you're going to be kind of forced into picking at certain points anyway. So I think if you focus on 3s, you'll end up with 2s. Like, enough 2s, probably more than you're comfortable with if you want to start on 3s. But don't just like try to go for 2s. I think that requires a more specific game plan, and you got to be drafting that kind of deck and archetype. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good overview of what to do in this meta. Hope you guys Hope you guys find success. We got all the ratings here out for you. You'll definitely have an edge in terms of just drafting a better deck than your opponents for the most part. Also, probably a softer meta to kick off things. It's gonna be good. I'm really looking forward to freaking getting back to a normal meta away from this Rise of Mech stuff.
All right. We're done.
We are done. So, you want to give a final shout out to our Patreons for supporting the Lightforge podcast?
Thank you so much to 4P, Afro Ninja, TB, Brand New, Chang Yin, Joshua C, Kirby 5 Life, Eric L, RV Night Train, and the other Patreons who give us money for us to do what we do. And we love you. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. Until next week. Schedule wise, we're just streaming every night, starting on Tuesday and the release for this first week. So easy.
Yeah.
Merps will have his first solo stream on Wednesday, and then another one on Saturday.
Yeah.
So all good things happening. And we'll have the Lightforge and Coop on next Sunday. Until then, this is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. See you guys.